This week's topic is imagery. Next week's is also imagery, but this week it's slant and direct. Those terms, what they mean and how you can use them. Just want to start by saying that the language used to describe poetry changes over time and source, of course. So in this, I'm going to use these pairs, literal and figurative, direct and slant, fixed and free floating. I mean them as mostly synonymous pairs. I'm telling you their names because depending on the source you use to follow up, you'll come across different terms, and I want you to be able to recognize them for what they are. By the way, if you didn't know, it's Emily Dickinson who said, "Tell it slant" in her poem. The first line of that poem is, "Tell all the truth, but tell it slant." So the first pair, literal versus figurative language. So literal, direct, and fixed. I'm using these as mostly synonymous. Literal language or poetic images that are literal are words that describe in a direct, concrete choices of diction that words that rely on their conventional meanings to describe an object or situation. In other words, their denotative meaning. So cat means fuzzy critter with teeth, claws, and tail. Also a direct image or a fixed image. So a fixed image can also, another way of explaining it is, I think this comes from Longman's maybe, a specific detailed picture or series of pictures created and presented by the poet in an effort to control the reader's imagination and act as a guide as the complication and complexity of the poem develops. So, specific concrete series of pictures. So they give an example, the cold black stove with lion's paws for legs. So in your environment, whatever is on your desk or table or floor or window or whatever, some object. Get your notebook or your laptop or however you record and describe it. Just direct details, concrete image. Nothing about what it means, nothing about how you feel about it, just the object. Here's another one. This is my coffee cup. The beaker with a thin glass arc for a handle and a caffeine molecule pictured in white plastic on its side. Those are fixed images. Figurative as opposed to literal. So this is the other side of that equation. Figurative, slant, and free floating are the three terms that go here. Figurative language is non-literal. It relies on non-denotative links to connect them and broaden the meaning or transform in a specified direction. This is the thing that makes it so powerful. It's the transformation possible. So the example that I gave here was lightning bugs, chandeliers, candle flames at the dark window. Lightning bugs, chandeliers, and candle flames at the dark window have one thing, or at least one thing in common. They're all about light. So they are links, figurative links, the light of that. But these are also pushing the reader in a direction without actually having to say, I want you to examine this relationship. It does it just by moving in that direction. Lightning bugs is something, for example, of nature. Chandelier is a human tool. The candle flames at a dark window has things that connect those two worlds, the outside and the inside. So the transformation in that line is to move the reader to think neither about the outside, nature, the inside. I guess we don't consider ourselves natural, although we are, the tool world, but somehow the world that's right on the verge of both. That's a slant image also. If you read Dickinson's poem, which is all over the internet, it's easy enough to find, you can see she never directly really talks about anything specific, no detailed concrete image, but she nevertheless transforms the reader and the poem through the choice of things like the slant image, but also sound and vowels that she uses in the movement of the poem sonically. A free-floating image is a more generalized or impressionistic picture, and it depends on the reader's subjective experience, memory, or imagination for its specificity. So, for example, in the workshop, I asked everyone to give me the first word that jumped into their mind for the word cat. And of all of the people there was no replication. Everyone had a different word. That was the first word that came to mind. That's connotation. That's the power that you're using. And if you don't specify what something is, like the stove with lion's paws for legs, and direct the reader to think of it as lion-like or leonine or slightly dangerous or with teeth and claws, then whatever image the person comes up with for stove is the thing that guides the thing. So this kind of free-floating image relies more on our willing participation as readers. That direct image, the coal black stove with lion's paw for legs, as a free-floating image, the example they gave is the baleful leonine dark stove. So it has the same basic qualities, leonine instead of a lion's paws for legs, dark stove instead of black. But because they're more general words, this idea of baleful, for example, allows me as a reader to decide what baleful looks like, or touches, feels like, or sounds like, or tastes like. The beaker with the thin glass arc for a handle, in the free-floating image, the fragile coffee mug with the molecules image on its side. So fragility is a much more generalized time than say thin glass. So what to use and when? First, you never use one or the other really. You decide what effect you're trying to achieve for your reader and use the most appropriate image. But some things are much more difficult to tell directly without closing down reception of your reader. Trigger warning stuff, for example, or it's very difficult for me as a human to read about certain subjects directly. But I can read about those subjects if led in through slant images. That's one good reason to use slant images. In the class, another way of talking about that was you can tell it directly, but if you tell it very carefully and hedging with context, that's an interesting idea. You can use direct or fixed images to produce a stronger sense of unity, completeness, and coherence in the poem, like Agatha Christie did for The Village. The village always comes right in the end. The murderer is always caught, always punished, and things return to normal after the event is solved. That's a kind of feeling you get with a direct or fixed image. The world will come to right. Things are still and stable. They feel complete and unified. Free-floating images, on the other hand, are thought to have a more personal effect. That is, it requires the reader to join in. And it offers the kind of looseness of control and structure that's appropriate to the aesthetics and philosophy of the 21st century. Again, that's from Longmans. I suppose that's true, but we always also long for stability. So it's a choice that you as a poet make according to what you're trying to achieve. Here's an exercise that you can give a try to turn this knowledge into your poem. So wherever you happen to be, describe the facts of something in the room where you are sitting or standing or running or whatever you're doing. An object. So it can be anything from a teapot to an alarm clock. Just the facts of it. And then the second step is once you have that list of facts, say 20 facts about the object, use those direct images to write a poem about an experience of using the object. So what are the objective facts that matter with using a teapot, for example? Does it transmit? Is it a metal teapot and you have to use it with a cloth handle? Is it a ceramic teapot that warms your hands when held closely to your chest? Use the direct images that you created in the first step to write a poem about using the object, your experience of using the object. The third and final step is to take the poem that you created in the first two steps and isolate just one aspect of the image. Then find at least two associations for it and add them to the poem. So you go from a direct object, direct experience and direct image to an indirect or free-floating image added to the poem. And find two associations. So like the word exercise, cat, the first two words that pop into your mind are X and Y. Do the same thing with the object or using object, and then add those to the poem. Learning how to translate from direct to slant based on your daily sensory data is a poem generator of your very own. It's something you can do every day, each and every moment. You are experiencing sensory data, even when you're asleep. The feel of your sheets, for example, the warmth of your blankets, the heft of your pillow. The Poetry Foundation also has an exercise that's much like the one I just described. It's just two steps, though. The first is you sit in a public space for at least 30 minutes and you watch. You write down at least 20, I think is what they said, different images. And remember, images are visual, auditory, gustatory, tactile, etc. What you see and hear. It doesn't matter what you pick. It can be flower fell off the boot of the taxi cab. It can be a child across the street screamed and slapped at something in the air. It can be a car went by and splashed water from a muddy puddle onto the young man running by. It can be anything at all, as mundane as you like. And then once that's done, you spend, they say, 30 minutes in your own quiet space. And then you think of the strong sensory memories and try to capture, again, in list form, and without worrying about providing context for readers. The memories in language conveying the strongest sensory details of the memory. What did your body do in that memory? You can use those to put together in exactly a poem in exactly the same way as we did before. Next time, images, but in this case, it'll be surreal and deep.